What's going on, my good people? Mike Hidalgo here. Thank you for joining us on another FCP Euro DIY. Today we're going to be working on a 2002 BMW E46 M3. Today on the M3 behind me, we're going to be covering how to replace your spark plugs and ignition coils. We recommend you do your plugs every 30 to 60,000 miles. However, your ignition coils tend to last a little bit longer, anywhere between 80 to 100,000, and in some examples, well over 100. The vehicle behind us has 288,000 miles on it. We don't know exactly what kind of service history it's had, so we're just going to go ahead and replace everything at once. Now, we're going to be using our Eldar coils and NGK spark plugs. Both of these are available as a kit or individually on fcpeuro.com. But before we get started on this DIY, let's take a look at some of the tools we're going to need for this job. For this job, we're going to need a couple basic tools, starting with a 3/8 drive ratchet, a 3/8 drive torque wrench. You're going to need a 5/8 spark plug socket. Today I have a CTA 16.12 millimeter socket, which is going to work okay. However, I recommend you get the 5/8 socket. A T30, we need a 10 millimeter socket, and a 13 millimeter socket specifically for our strut reinforcement bar. And then I'm also going to use a flathead screwdriver in case I have any stuck electrical connectors, and I like using this as a leverage tool to pull out the ignition coils if they get a little stuck. And then a nice to have but not mandatory is an electric ratchet, just to speed up the removal and install of some of the hardware we are going to encounter. Now that we have our tools covered, let's go ahead and get started on this DIY. All right, my good people, we are under the hood of the M3. On some cars, depending on what you have, you may have a strut bar reinforcement installed or not. We have this M Performance one, so we're going to work on removing that first. Ours is held on by 4 13 millimeter nuts. So I'm going to grab my 13 millimeter socket. I'm just going to use the electric ratchet to speed things up a bit and work on freeing that up first. Now we have the strut brace off, we can go ahead and work on removing this upper cowling section. To get started, we're going to work on removing our positive cable that runs through this plastic encasing that attaches to the cowl. Just separate it from the cowl piece. We can just let it loose, we'll be able to work around it. From there we have 3 twist locking tabs that hold our cabin air filter cover and filter in place. We're going to go ahead and remove those. You can see this one doesn't really do its job anymore, but we have one on either end. Just twist counterclockwise. Free them up. Then from there you simply pull up and you can slide it out. I'm just going to rest that up there so we don't forget about it. Now would be a good time to inspect your cabin air filter. This one looks recently replaced, so it's in pretty good shape. From there we have a total of 4 T30s that we need to remove that hold this cowl in place. So you can see ours only has 3. I'm going to go ahead and zap those 3 off. T30 on my electric ratchet and just pull up and away. With that removed, now we can work on freeing up this breather hose that sits on top of the valve cover. You have a tab on either end that you want to pinch on this. Now, as these cars get older, they tend to get pretty brittle and break. So just be mindful of that, especially if you have a higher mileage example like we do today. So here are your tabs on either end. These are the ones that lock it into place. And you have this ridged area on the opposite ends that you squeeze to pull up. With that free, just swing it over to the side. I'm going to start by undoing our 6 10 millimeter bolts using a 10 millimeter socket on my electric ratchet. We're just going to zap them off. And now from there, we should be able to just lift this cover up and set it to the side. I'm also going to go ahead and reinstall my oil fill cap just so nothing falls in there by accident while we're working. With that removed, we now have access to all 6 ignition coils as well as the spark plugs underneath. So pretty straightforward. We're going to start by unlocking all of them and disconnecting the electrical connectors, and then from there we'll work on pulling the ignition coils off. All right, so let's go ahead and unplug these coils. To do so, you're going to want to lift up on the electrical connector. As you lift up, they should unlock themselves from the connector. You pull back, and then from there, it's just a matter of wrestling the coil out. Sometimes these can really be stuck on there. What I like to do is I grab a flathead screwdriver or some sort of long tool like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, and I use it just as a leverage tool and then gently course them out. I'm going to go ahead and repeat this process on the other 5. If your electrical connector isn't popping out as you're unlocking these tabs, oftentimes what you have to do is squeeze the ends of them as they do separate themselves from the body of the coil, and that just means that they widen out over time. Sometimes this will happen, so just give them a good squeeze on either end and it should allow you to unlock them. Same thing as you pull them up. If this comes off, put it back on, squeeze the ends, and with your other hand pull up, you should be able to get the ignition coil out. Another thing worth mentioning is this small clip right here. Now, you're supposed to have 2, one on either end of this plastic rail. You can pinch them and pull up on it if you want to free it up just a hair to give yourself a little bit more room for these electrical connectors to back into. So again, not mandatory, doesn't have to come out, but having that little bit of play is helpful. Now we have all 6 ignition coils removed. The next thing I want to do is just a bit of an extra step, just due to the condition and the mileage on this car. I'm going to take some compressed air and just blow out all the chambers before I remove the spark plugs, just to make sure that any debris that may have fallen in there over the years can come out before we take out the spark plugs and let it fall into the cylinder wall. So just some compressed air. If you don't have shop air, you can use a shop vac and just blow it out. Again, there shouldn't really be anything in there, but you never know. This is just added precaution. Now we can grab our extension, our socket, and work on removing those spark plugs. Now we have all our chambers blown out. We're going to go ahead and start by removing our spark plugs. Again, 5/8 socket is what you want to use with a long extension. They're not too bad. Looks like they were replaced about 3 years ago. Same thing with the ignition coils, but definitely doesn't hurt to put some new ones in there. I'll take our new spark plug. I fed it into the socket. I set it in gently by hand. And then whenever I do a spark plug job, I always like to reverse everything a little bit just to make sure it didn't engage incorrectly in the head, and then start it by hand. So I go counterclockwise and then clockwise. I'm going to snug this all the way down by hand, and then we're going to go ahead and torque them down to about 24 Newton meters or 18 foot-pounds. Beautiful. And now I'm just going to go ahead and repeat the process on the other 5. Now we have all 6 of our spark plugs installed and torqued down, we can go ahead and install our new ignition coils. At this point, it's really dealer's choice should you want to use a dielectric grease or not. Personally, I'm not a fan of them with these suction style coils. What happens is sometimes you put on a little bit too much dielectric grease, and then what ends up happening is the ignition coil just walks off of the spark plug. So with these kind of setups, I simply like to just install them dry. If you really wanted to, you can put a little dab on the very interior portion of the coil where the end of the spark plug is going to sit on, but you don't really need it. So we're going to go ahead and install these dry. Obviously, we're going to make sure to align the electrical connector with where the actual connector is coming off the harness. So they're kind of clocked in a V for every 2 cylinders. So we're going to go ahead and install them and then continue on this DIY. So install is pretty straightforward. I'm going to get it set into place on the cylinder head. As it goes in, I'm mating it with my electrical connector. I'm going to latch it closed, and then once it's closed, I'm just going to push it down into place. And you're going to kind of feel it bottom out against the spark plug. Now we're just going to go ahead and do that same for the other 5. Awesome. Now we have all our ignition coils installed. We can go ahead and install our beauty cover once more. So to do that, take your oil filler cap off if you're following along at home. You can grab your beauty cover, slide it over the top. Beautiful. From there, just to be safe, reinstall your oil fill cap. And now we can install the 6 10mm bolts. We're just going to go ahead and snug them down with the electric ratchet. Now that that's situated, we can go ahead and reinstall our vacuum line so we don't forget about it. Just slide it back over, line it up gently, and press it into place. Now that that's done, we can go ahead and reinstall our cowl portion. And to do that, you simply kind of rest it back into place at an angle, and it's going to key itself back towards the firewall. With that situated, you can reinstall your 4 T30 screws. If you want to torque these down, no more than 7 foot-pounds, 10 Newton meters. With that, we can reinstall our cabin filter. Just make sure you install it the same way that it came out. The cabin filter has a notch on either end on the bottom that keys into the cowl here. You can reinstall your lid. Make sure you secure your lockdown tabs. And I don't think this middle one, no, the middle one had no life left on our car. And then last but not least, you want to make sure your power cable gets clipped back onto your cowl here. Now all we have left to do on this car specifically is reinstall our strut reinforcement bar. So set that into place. We'll grab our 4 13mm nuts, and then using a 13mm socket on our electric ratchet, we'll go ahead and snug them down. And there you have it, my good people. Another DIY in the books. Overall, a pretty straightforward job on the S54. Nice and convenient up top. You don't have too much to remove in the way like you do on some of the other cars. If you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments on what we did today, leave them in the comment box below. And if you like this DIY and you want to see more like them, please consider subscribing. We make new ones all the time. As always, thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one.